In this video we are going to use Adobe After Effects to create a sequence showing the compositing of all layers that came from Maya. So I have a number of folders, 6 to be more precise, and I have a background image on which I'm going to be compositing my monster. I have a color layer, a shadow layer, an ambient occlusion, incandescent, specular, and wireframe layers. So I'm going to start by creating my After Effects file, a new composition. I'm going to make sure I'm going to call it Monster Comp. I'm going to make sure that it's HD 1080p 24 frames per second. I'm going to give me the frame and the aspect ratio. I'm going to maintain it square pixels, 24 frames per second. I'm going to maintain it for now at starting at 00 and then time code of 20 seconds in total. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to start by, you can see my master composition, start by importing my layers by saying import multiple files. And I'm going to start by importing from all my sequences. I'm going to start with the ambient occlusion on top. Select the first one, make sure that it's a TIFF sequence is active. I'm going to import that one. It's going to ask me for how to read the alpha channel. I'm going to keep it straight. I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to go and import the next one, which is the color sequence. Same thing, TIFF sequence should be checked on. Import. I'm going to just say OK. And then I go to my incandescence. Okay. And then to my shadow. Okay. And then my specular. And the last one would be wireframe. And additionally, I'm going to bring just a single frame, which is not a sequence, for the background. I'm going to hit done. So I have imported all of my sequences there. And if I open it up here, I can try to read their names. And I'm going to start by putting my footage on the sequence here so I can start laying on top of it all the different layers. I know my layers are 120 frames from frame 1 to 120. That is roughly 6 seconds, a bit less than that. And I'm going to need more than that. So 6 seconds would be just a short little sequence for the character to spin one turn. So I'm going to have to do multiple turns to show the different parts. I'm going to start by bringing in my wireframe. Let me try to get my wireframe showing up here. So I'm just going to click on my wireframe. And the wireframe shows up on top of it. And then I'm going to bring in my wireframe starts from 0 right there. And I'm going to then add start showing the wireframe, then going into the ambient occlusion, then going onto the color, and so on and so forth. So let me just try to add my ambient occlusion. And what I can do is I can just simply, because they have to be aligned on the same sequence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a frame, a baby frame, like a second at 212, which it would be kind of 2.5. I'm going to change the opacity of this. I'm going to open up here and I'm going to put a keyframe on the opacity, and I'm going to just use, let's say, 10 frames backwards to change the opacity to 0. That way I go from wireframe while continue spinning, goes into ambient occlusion, and I will use here a color layer now, and I'm gonna just put it right next to it so it will continue spinning. So I went from wireframe to ambient occlusion. I'm gonna just apply an exposure, that I have an exposure filter. To that there is exposure filter, I apply it to the color layer, and I'm gonna change up here the gamma for it will be 2.2, and because I want the ambient occlusion to transition into the color, I'm going to bring another ambient occlusion here on top of the color, but I will change its transparency. So I'm going to just change it from the opacity from the here. I'm going to put a keyframe on 100%. I'm going to back it up here to the beginning of it. I'm going to put another keyframe. Change the second keyframe to 0. So the ambient occlusion will vanish. So, but I want though to maintain the ambient occlusion's shadow on the background now. So I'm going to duplicate this ambient occlusion. Let's see, edit, duplicate, Control D. But this one, I'm going to change on this. I'm going to get a little bit closer to see it. On the same keyframes, I'm going to reverse the transparency, and I'll explain a little bit in a few minutes. I'm going to go back to 100% this one, to 0 on initial one. So pretty much it is not, you cannot tell the transition from one to the other one, but, and so you have two ambient occlusions stacked on top of each other. But the second one, I'm going to change its mode from normal to multiply, so that it's going to change and appear on top of a creature, and you'll maintain the shadow on the floor. Now, but now that I see it, the opacity of that ambient occlusion is too strong, so I'm going to bring it down to say only maybe 40%, so that I still keep a little bit of that shadow on the ground and on the character. It's very soft, but it adds to the punch of it. Now I'm going to now add, let me just get a little far away now, halfway this sequence. I'm going to add the shadow layer. So I bring the shadow layer one more time, and I put it right on top of it. You see the shadow layer is applied onto the tree and everything, onto the bench and everything. So, but it's too strong, so I'm going to change the transparency of the shadow layer, let's say to 40%. I'm going to put a keyframe right there, and then I'm going to back it up about 10 frames or so, and in that first one it's going to be 0, That way it shows up as it is spinning. So we started with wireframe, ambient occlusion, color, shadow. I'm going to need to continue with those ambient occlusion and color. Continue spinning, continue appearing there because some of these duplicate color. The second ambient occlusion, which is a multiply, and I'm gonna use the shadow. So I'm gonna just say duplicate, so it's gonna be same thing or just same as if I press Control D. I'm gonna move them up so that they are on top of the stack there. I'm gonna move it to the side here. That way I continue spinning. Although the ambient occlusion, if you remember, had a keyframe on it for the transparency, and I need to remove that first keyframe. That way its transparency is now the same as it was before, but I also need to modify the transparency for the shadow. You got a keyframe there, so I'm going to open up that opacity. I'm going to remove the initial value. That way the value of the shadow is constant now. And now what I'm going to do is add on top of it, I'm going to add the specular. Same thing, the specular is going to appear just kind of halfway through. So I'm just going to open up the transform, the opacity there from Z100, and then back it up a few frames, about 10 frames, and then put another keyframe there and then change it to 0. And I need to change the specular so that it's not the mode is not normal, but I'm going to put lighten or add. Let's try add. So add gets added to it, and I can see the liquid effect, the liquid but the wet effect appear on him. It's a bit too wet really, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the opacity of it on the second keyframe to, let's say, 50. That way it's not so wet, still shiny, but not so much. You can see it showing up right there. I'm going to need to extend my timeline, I think, a little bit more, or maybe not. So I'm going to have to continue duplicating all of this. Again, Control D. I'm going to move them up again to the top so that all of them will go there, and I have to move them over so they continue spinning. But this time we're going to change some of the attributes here. For example, the specular the specular has to change its transparency. So I'm going to remove that keyframe that was 0, so that now its specular is all constant. And I'm going to add the incandescence. And again, my incandescence will be used as a add. You can turn it on and off to see if it adds effect, and it does add some to it. And I'm going to again put a little bit of a animation. Let me just put it back here on the transparency, or rather the opacity, so that it shows up my creature. So I can preview it now. Let me just save my file before I do that. Alright, I'm going to say compositing sequence. And let me just play it back just to see how that looks. Okay, so that just created a RAM preview, so now I can see the whole thing and the actual timing, showing all the effects, all the layers on it. Alright, I discovered that there is some little issue with the eyeball, but for now, for the demonstration purposes, this shows what I need on my character. Alright, I'm going to just stop this, and now I'm ready to just simply export it out. Let me make sure that the last frame is showing exactly that last frame and not showing me a blank frame. So I'm going to bring this one back to right there, making sure that the last frame is not a blank frame. Okay, so I'm ready to export this out. So I'm going to simply just save it, and while I'm in my monster composition, I'm going to say File, Export. I'm going to send it to the render queue. On the render queue, I'm going to make sure that my settings are best and 24 frames per second. I'm going to hit OK. Make sure that my output module, I can just choose. Right now I don't have a H264 here, so I'll just click QuickTime, and I say OK. I'm gonna make sure that it saves to the right folder. So let me go back to my folder very quickly here, and I'm sure I'm going to remove this here. So monster composition sequence. I'm gonna save it there, and I'm going to queue it, and I'm going to save my file before I send it. I'm going to queue it on Adobe Media Encoder, which is the program that will give me the H264 format that I need. There it is. So I actually have one from a previous render, so let me make sure this one I'm gonna remove. I don't want to render those. So here is my latest one. I'm going to just submit that one to render. And my settings, actually I was forgetting to show you the settings. Mine come already as an H264 here, but if yours doesn't, you simply need to open up the option to click here on H264. Okay, So that one just simply did it there. Let me just take a peek at the movie here, the final output. Okay, here it is. So hopefully QuickTime will open. There it is. Now I have my full QuickTime showing my whole sequence. Alright, that is it for now. So good luck on your compositing sequence on your creature.